All right, it is now 12 o'clock. We are going to get started. Hey, everyone. My name is Mike Black. This is the latest episode of the Page Black Leadership Series. We are here every Thursday with solutions to challenges that business leaders in the middle market face. And today we are talking about the Great Resignation. And I want to start with a story. We're going to give you a little data first, and then I'll tell you a bit of a story. How many people do you think left their job in June? If you're living under a rock, that number is 3.9 million. It's a little bit better than April, which was 4 million. And there's studies out there that say 40% of workers are open to changing. And so, this is pretty compelling data to me, but I was reading, and I think this was on Jim's feed when I was looking at it, and I was reading, and there was a business leader there, and he was something that I like, which is skeptical. I'm a skeptical person by nature. I believe that there's a lot of snake oil being sold out there today. But he said, look, HR companies are capitalizing on this, or the potential is that HR companies are capitalizing on this. And they're talking about this because they want business, but it's not real. And so my thought for you, audience, and really my challenge for you is if this is a crisis, then you probably need to respond. And if it's a crisis, it's an opportunity. It's a chance for you to look at how can I improve my retention? How can I improve my employee recruitment? How can I honestly, find the right employees? Like, this is a great time to look at that, because if the Great Resignation is real and 8 million people have left their jobs in a period of 60 days over the last 6 months, I'm kind of pulling data there. If that's true, that's also an opportunity, because that means if 40% of the workforce is considering leaving, that means 40% of the workforce could be considering joining your company. And so it's a chance to really bring in the right people. And we're going to get into a little bit of that today. So before we go too far, let me introduce, and I'll go where you can actually see people. I'm going to introduce my audience. My first speaker is Page Black's very own Chief Marketing Officer, Marilyn Haywood Page. And I was told distinctly that there is no hyphen, even though I thought there was for a while. Turns out there's not. She has been marketing since she was 13. Not recently, but we won't throw timelines at it, but she has a master's in integrated marketing communications. She's worked at a number of agencies before she's landed here. She's an accomplished jazz singer who has sung for famous people. If you're interested, have a coffee with her. And then she now has a newfound interest in behavioral economics and is now taking a graduate course in that to decide, do I do my PhD? Do I do my master's? What is it that I'm up to here? So she's good with that. Give it and we'll share her LinkedIn profile if you'd like to connect with her. We also have Jim Bishop. He is the founder of Conjunction Leadership. After 2 decades of corporate leadership, Jim founded Conjunction Leadership, where he works with companies of all sizes to improve their employee culture. His approach is a blend of science and art. He emphasizes the value of the whole person and not just how the employee shows up at work. I think that's ideal for this conversation when we're talking about retention. He's a sought-after thought leader on creating more optimal employee and customer experience when delivering, and he often delivers keynotes. So we'll be looking forward to him showing me up here today. And he does presentation for boards or executive teams who are in high growth modes. And April will then go ahead and share his info there. All right, let's move forward. My name is Mike Black. I'm the CEO, managing partner of Page Black. I'm also known as the janitor. It's a pleasure to meet you all. I'm the least important person on this. So I want to start this really back to the call that we had, or that discussion on LinkedIn. Is it real? What are you seeing in regards to, and I want to go ahead and bring them in. Jim, what are you seeing in regards to this?
Thanks, Mike, for this panel and bringing this to the forefront. I think it is a big topic. So I have a privilege, and part of my practice is in the coaching space. So I'm behind closed doors, or in this case on Zoom calls with other leaders all across different types of businesses and at all different levels. And I can tell you there's a big disconnect. That's what I see. I see particularly in the Gen Z kind of framework, if we're going to put some time or put some generations around it. And even just in the general employee base, a great discontent with what's going on. They're wrestling with these existential questions that have been brought on by COVID. They're asking themselves big picture stuff like, do I fit? Do I matter? Is this my life work? Is this aligned with my mission? A lot of questions that they're bringing up are, especially as return to work, as a return to office has become a bigger thing. Like, is it worth my time to drive 30 minutes one way to get there? Is it worth my time to walk in 10 minutes from the parking lot to be in this place? And they're recognizing the value of that time. So this great bubbling has been occurring for quite a while, this discontent. Yet when I'm behind closed doors or on Zoom calls with people that have executive level positions, many of them are not wrestling with those things. They're wrestling with business continuity and how do I keep the doors open and how do we innovate differently for our customers? And their focus has been so forward focused that they're sometimes, well, at least what I see is sometimes missing what's happening right around them. So what I see happening right now is just what I call a big disconnect. What's happening in conversations with employees may not be happening in conversations with leaders. And if that conversation isn't happening between leaders and employees, there's going to be some reckoning, I think, that will occur here. And your data already suggests that May, June, and July, I think we've lost 11 million people and switched roles in that period of time. That's big.
Yeah. So why do you think there's this disconnect where it's hard to see with a level, like we have the latest technology with communication. We can talk to anybody on the planet on video at any point in time. And yet so the data is there. It's in the news. It's all over the place. Why do you think, I'm going to say, why do you think business leaders are missing this? Because that really is the challenge I see before them.
Well, again, bias, my opinion, but business leaders have not grown up speaking heart language very much. And only recently has this issue of emotions really become a topic in leadership conversations. And so people at senior levels in organizations have grown up knowing how to make decisions and get things done and work on organizational structure. What they haven't always learned is how does my personal understanding of the world and my emotional set guide my decision-making framework. And they might know that individually. Those are very uncomfortable conversations for most people to have. And in our Zoom-oriented world, it has become more difficult, I think, for people to say, like, let's relate to one another through a flat screen versus let's relate to one another face-to-face. And I think just as COVID in general bubbled up these topics in people's minds, they just need a space to talk them through sometimes. And they're not finding that availability with the leadership that they have. That would be my summary.
Okay, so when you were talking about the disconnect, what came to my mind was in the last year and a half, the business leaders have been consumed with how do I keep the wheels on the bus?
Yes.
How do I survive? How do I keep these people employed? They're not thinking about the squishy, how are they feeling? They're thinking, how am I keeping the paychecks? So I can totally see why that disconnect would happen is you've been in like boots on the ground, like let's keep the doors open. You're not thinking about, well, gee, gosh, what do you think your life mission is?
Yeah.
Not my business. I'm trying to keep the doors open.
Yeah. And Marilyn, I quite candidly, when leaders get to that space, they are admitting those things, right? Like my purpose has been to keep this thing afloat. I felt the pressure of all the families that I help employ. I've felt the pressure of making sure that our customers still get continuity happening in their business fronts when supply chain is messed up and they're solving crisis after crisis after crisis, which does leave them emotionally spent for themselves, let alone having time and empathy for other people at that point in time. So I honestly think the great discontent or the great resignation is occurring not just in workplaces, but my fear is that it's also occurring in home settings. Like if what we're doing is crisis management all day long at work, it's really hard for us to lead emotionally at home as well. So whether or not that leads to a whole other topic of conversation, but I do think that there's probably a lot of this, what's going to happen at the home front too.
Well, I think, I'm probably getting into the next question. So sorry, Mike, I was about to go into another topic, but I'm going to let you do that.
Oh, okay. I was just thinking about, we've had this huge I'm kind of thinking 30 years at this point of the technology changes. And I think about my dad when he was working and the shifts, and as he got older before he retired 15 years ago. But as he struggled with understanding, connecting still because technology had changed, and it's not like it's changed less, but since 2005 when he stepped down, it's actually changed more. I mean, Twitter was not a thing then. And now it drives, that's just one example of that. And so I think that one of the struggles that business leaders who kind of came up and maybe at my age or a little bit older, that, technology in the world has changed faster than they've been able to adapt. And the power structure's changed. Whereas, LinkedIn is here, you have the ability to connect with people and get a business, go and get work in different places. You do not have to work your way up in the way that they did. And certainly in more traditional industries, if you think about it. I know a guy that a friend of mine he got a job with one of the big 4 consulting firms. And he talked about how he is probably 7 years ahead of the senior leadership in terms of, like, you look at the lifetime of his career path of development. What has taken him a year and a half took them 7 years, because he's so much more adept at the technology. He's been showing them how to do the technology and is now their best friend. And so I think that that's a huge player in this, is that I think business leaders, you can kind of get your blind spot on, your blinders on, and I think you can miss things because of that. And I think also the stress of meeting payroll, bringing in new customers, can bring a challenge as well.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I mean, the talent management is a huge, huge topic of conversation today. How do people build careers? But even more broadly, Mike, not just technology, I know how to work it, but technology making the world a smaller place, right? So if we're in the COVID environment, people have learned to work from home and they've learned to relate differently to one another. That has opened up career opportunities I never thought possible, because I can be working in Mumbai from Indianapolis, right? I can be working in Silicon Valley without ever having to leave. And people now are saying, then why do I need to return to the campus? Why do I need to come back to a physical proximity when I understand what the value of my time is worth? And I might be able to get more done and be more present with my family and not have to relocate them and uproot them from their schools or their environments to wherever to go work somewhere else. So I think technology works in both regards in that place.
The other thing that I'm seeing, Mike, is that there's, fear of missing out and YOLO, you only live once. So there's a lot of domino of, well, so-and-so left their job. Well, so-and-so didn't go back to so I almost feel like it's, well, wait a minute. We all just survived a year where people were on unemployment and not working, and there's all this technology and people aren't going back. So now it's, well, now I have all these possibilities, and other people are leaving their jobs. And so there's this fear of missing out.
It's almost contagious.
Yeah, I think so. And then what was the other thing I wanted to say was from the brand perspective. I lost my train of thought.
I'll give you a second to catch up with yourself, because that happens. And so my comment, no worries at all. We'll get back to that in just a second. Jim, you made the point that people are talking about being able to work in different places around the world. We have a client who's an executive coach, really high-end executive coach, has just moved to Costa Rica, spends more of his time. Puerto Rico, excuse me. Yeah. All right. There you go. Shows what I know. That's why Maryland's in charge of the clients. But that said, he's doing that, and that's pretty darn cool that he's able to kind of do his business. Now, he does fly out to the States as needed to do things in person, but I have certainly looked at, cost of living, where is it? And where does it make sense? Right. It's an interesting challenge. Jim,
okay, I found it.
Okay,
sorry,
go on.
The other thing that I'm seeing is that companies are now looking at strategic recruitment marketing, basically. So recruitment marketing, that is the other thing that I'm seeing. They are now going, okay, marketing team, now we need to market us to prospective employees. Okay.
Well, we just had a client sign on with that. So we're ahead of the game. Darn it. We didn't have that research wasn't out. All right. Jim, talk briefly about the poll that you have out in preparation, and I'll talk about why we have that in place in the first place. But tell us what you're seeing so far. And then April, if you wouldn't mind sharing that poll, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah, I'm just curious to see what the voice of people are, because I know I can get biased with the people that are showing up on the other side of my screen sometimes. So I just wanted to launch something out there to the ethersphere and see why, if this thing is real and if this is true, why would people be considering leaving their job? And I think there's some fundamental elements that make a great culture, but also make the atmosphere better for employees to want to belong. And some of those are, maybe the work is too demanding. Maybe some of those are because I don't feel like I fit and I matter. I'm not connected. Some of that is I've lost autonomy in some of my decision making, and I no longer feel like I can get my voice heard at the decision table sometimes. And other times it's just because these existential questions of life come up and I don't know how to handle them. So instead of me sitting in with those, sometimes it's easier just to take a job change or make a structural change and say, maybe this will help fulfill me, right? So I think there's answers to each of those areas if people really want to get into it. But I'm just curious as to hear, what does the average person say is going on in their world? Curiously, on my poll, people are commenting even that there are some times that none of these categories are correct, and there are certain actions that employers are taking that are causing them to say, okay, I no longer fit here. This is against my value set. This is against who I believe as a person. And so I'm also curious to hear what other responses people come up with. So,
all right. So I read that poll this morning and thought it was fascinating.
Where is it?
It's on LinkedIn. April just shared it so that we can get the answer. If you want to see the answer that's out there, it's not what I thought it would be. I filled out my answer. You go fill out yours and go find out the answer that is actually leading right now. It's a bit of a race. I won't tell you who's winning. Go find out. But the truth is it's fascinating because it's not what I thought it would be. But it makes total sense in like hindsight's 2020. There's that. All right, we had a couple comments and then we'll jump into something else. Mike Sandstrom says, same, our director of quality systems, 24-year-old AS 9100 expert, supply chain expert, Six Sigma, all learned from the workplace. She's in CU's lead school of business. What a start off for her career. Company human investment, you're seeing a lot more as well. Right. I think I know who you're talking about, Mike, and I think she has a spectacular future against her. Ernie says the tax code, individual states and their tax codes and the courts have yet to have their say about these decisions. Yeah. So true. And Google's got to say, they're saying if you're not in California and you have a lower cost of living, maybe they're not going to pay you as much. That'll be fascinating as that works out. Google, if anybody can make you take less pay, maybe it's Google or Facebook. I don't know. All right. Briefly, let me get into Page Black briefly. Business leaders, you go to work every day. You sit down at a desk. Maybe that desk is in a home office. Might be in a corner office in a high-rise downtown. But when you sit down to that desk, you face serious challenges. Maybe it's new regulations. Maybe it's figuring out the tax code that your employees have to, all that court issue that Ernie just brought up. Maybe your team is changing. You're trying to figure out how to make culture work, even though half your team is hybrid and they won't turn on their video. Or it might be how you leverage marketing to reach your business goals, navigating that marketing landscape. So a couple challenges in that area that I see business leaders face. One is the technology changes overnight. If you do something today, it may be different tomorrow. Google just released a new update, just as an example. Two, if you are a business leader and you are in decision-making mode, there is no question that you are getting emails with what we would call offers of silver bullet solutions that work just like that. You can't hear me snap my fingers because I wouldn't do that to you. But if you try one of those and then you try another, you might get discouraged and think marketing doesn't work for your company. It doesn't have to be that way for what it's worth. And finally, how we make buying decisions just changed. Do you make buying decisions the same way you did before COVID? I don't think so. And I think it's changed for companies. I think the way that outbound sales is conducted is changing. So all that, the result is, as a business leader, you are forced to make decisions on limited data. The downside of making decisions on limited data is you're more likely to fail. That goes back to if you're smart, you fail fast, you fail forward. You're trying a new thing. That said, it still might take a year for you to find the right solution, and that's a year late to market. And worst case scenario, it works. Your marketing is very successful, but you bring in the wrong customers. The least profitable, the most difficult, and now your culture is being impacted, your team's miserable. We don't want that. So we like to talk about data-driven marketing decisions, and that's why we think you should approach marketing. What's different about what I'm going to tell you is when I say data, you see graphs. You see clicks on websites and you're seeing things like, at least that's what I think you're seeing. And that is correct, but that's how you measure the effectiveness of marketing. What you need to be looking at in terms of data is who are your very best customers? What are the most profitable customers? What's important to them? What is your competition saying? Is there a gap there that you can leverage, that you can go after that and take some of their business because you know what's important to your best customers and you can go find more people like that? All right. Thank you, Mike Sandstrom. So I'll tell you a brief story. We worked with an industrial company. I should be on the screen if I'm telling you a story. Let me see if I can do that. We work with an industrial company in northern Colorado. They brought us in to do market research and figure out, well, what is important to our best customers? We did that project. It took 3 months. We dug in. And the first initiative that we did with them, we came up with a sales sheet that essentially gave their sales team ammunition. The company was doing about $5 million when we got started. In the first 3 months of that campaign, I believe they closed about $3 million of new business. So those aren't terrible results. And it really comes down to understanding your best customers, what's important to them, and then how do you go after that business? What's the right way? That's a B2B example, but there are examples all over the place about both of those. So enough said about Page Black. Let's just have you, oops, I've gone too far. Let's go back there. So today we are doing a live stream on the Great Resignation. In this next segment, I'll give you a hint that we are going to get into some solutions, but we're actually doing a full webinar of solutions September 14th. Now, we also have a partner in this, Lisa Smith of Puzzle HR is going to join us. She couldn't make it today, maybe because I forgot to invite her until Monday. And not her fault, mine, but she's going to be joining us. We also have Jim talking about it. So we're going to talk about really 3 things that you need to think. Whoop, you can't see my hand. 3 things that you need to think about. And those things are, first, you want to think about your culture. How is your culture standing out? And that's going to stand out. If you go look at that poll Jim did, you're going to find the answer has culture in it. Second thing you need to be thinking about is what are your HR processes? And I said process is the wrong word. Practices is the word. I was corrected on that one as well. And then finally, how do you use your brand? How does your brand stand out to employees, not to potential customers, but to employees? It's a great place to work. And then also a place that your current employees can be proud of and not want to leave. And those are things that we will get into on Tuesday, September 14th. And I hope you can join us. I am pretty sure there's a webinar that either April will share it or has shared it, but let's get into questions again. We always want to give concrete, actionable advice as we're having you on these calls, and I appreciate everybody's comment today. The first one, and then I'll look at comments and bring anything in that we can, is what is one single actionable step a business leader can take today to do better with the Great Resignation? Let me go back. Marilyn, I'm going to lead off with you.
Sure. Purpose. Mission, vision. People need to feel connected to what they are doing, why they are doing it, that they matter, that their work matters. And brands need to be communicating their mission, their vision, their values, their purpose. And if you poll everyone in your organization and you ask them, what is the mission of our company? I'm going to wager that at least 50% of them don't know. And that goes for nonprofits because there isn't enough messaging around mission, vision, values, purpose. You have to connect what the organization's purpose and mission is to the individual's tasks. And that is not easy to do. That is a communications issue. But that, I believe, is what will make people feel like what I do matters here. What I do has purpose. I'm not just checking a bunch of boxes. I'm not just doing a bunch of stuff to get a paycheck. Because clearly there's a lot of jobs out there. I can go get a paycheck. So that is, I think, the most important thing that any brand can do is lean into vision, mission, purpose, and communicate it in every which way possible to your team.
There's a couple things. I don't know if you saw it. Edelman just came up with research this morning that talked about that, purpose being so valuable. So it's interesting to see how that plays out. Ernie
says start with why. There you go.
There you go. That's what I was going to do. So let's get Ernie on the screen here with the start with why is what Ernie says as well. And then Mike Sandrum says, and I'll pop this up there. He says, I think things will normal out. Jobs will always be needed and in high demand, and the tables will turn again, and employees will be on the outside looking in. Right now, we are an employee. So, Mike, you think of this as almost like housing. Is it a buyer or a seller's market? Is kind of an analysis. And I don't know if I agree with you. I mean, I appreciate your perspective on this, but I don't know. The technology shifts and the way people think about work, I'm not sure it's going to, yes, obviously it will ebb and flow, but I wonder if I don't think we'll go back to where we were. Let's get Marilyn back on the screen. Sorry, Marilyn, for cutting you off there. And then finally, I'm just going to leave this one up for a half second. We have our upcoming webinar, How to Survive. And we just talked about that, but I'll give you this here. There's a link. If you go look in the chat on LinkedIn, there, that link is there, September 14th. All right, Jim, what's your thought on that? What's like one thing a business leader can do today?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's certainly organizational things, right? But going back to our previous conversation, I'm always sensitive to adding more tasks to an already burdened person. And so at this point in time, when I start talking about how do we get into this organizationally, leaders will tune out because they have been burned out of keeping the business open, right? So I like to start with the first thing that they can do is create space. I mean, this is a cluttered place. The world is crazy. There's a lot of decisions. And the first thing that they need to be doing right now is to create that space for them to get comfortable with what is making them uncomfortable, right? If they don't have space in their life, they won't make space for other people in their life. They won't make space for these difficult existential questions to bubble up or be able to handle some of the emotional questions that people are asking at this point in time. And I even think if they don't create the space for themselves to get comfortable in this space, it will be very difficult for them to re-innovate or to brand their culture, if you want to call it that, because their mind is not in a creative space, it's in a reactive space. And so I do think it eventually needs to get to that point where they're able to say, I mean, I like to liken culture to a garden, and it doesn't need to just be planted and cultivated. It needs to be constantly tended to, and it needs to make sure that it morphs with the seasons. And we are in a fundamentally different season. So even if you had a great purpose and a great mission and a great value set, and it was articulated on brass plaques on your walls, I'm telling you right now, that's probably not enough because everything just changed. And so for them to be able to come back to and say, what is the value set of our organization today? Where are we at today? What do we want to get done today? Is a fundamentally different question, but it can't be asked unless leaders have the emotional space to hear all of the viewpoints out there right now. Like, it is a different work environment for people to be in. And I do think it will rebound. I do think things are going to normalize, but I also think that it is fundamentally different than the way most of us grew up and working our career in a hierarchical setting versus working our career in an open market. So
Jim, you said something that I mean, I think about the headspace that an executive has to be in to keep it all moving forward. And now you're saying, okay, you need to create this space. You need to tell me more about that. Cause that just seems like, wow, if I'm keeping the wheels on the bus, man, I got to have a certain way of thinking. And, you know, like how do you make that space? Brain? Like what does that look like? I mean, that doesn't sound easy to me at all.
Yeah, this is where it gets into the squishy space a little. And I'll give you a story. So I just got off the call this morning with one of my clients, and very busy executive, high level in the organization, worried about all the strategy and how they make fundamental business changes, and on and on and on and on. And every question I asked, she had an answer to. She knew where she wanted to go. She knew what she wanted to do. The question that I then asked was, well, what's keeping you from doing that? She's like, I have all these ideas. I just don't know how to go do those. Right. So the squishy spot is getting into that space where they are able to say, like, I haven't managed my own self-care well. I haven't been defining my own boundaries well. I haven't been able to put things in place and perspective to say that self-care isn't selfish. And for me to go to the gym, or for me to spend reflective time reading, or for me to read the journal publications that I need to keep up on my job, those things have seemed selfish in the last 24 months. And I've not taken time for that. So it's literally just coming back to what helped you be you in the first place, and then putting some boundaries around that and helping them say self-care isn't selfish. That's exactly how I've gone about it, and how I've seen other clients been able to make huge amounts of pivot by saying, this space that I used to have, I didn't have. And I mean, some of us that was our commute time, right? That was the time we drove to the office and the time we decompressed home. When that doesn't exist anymore, then I just filled that up with other work. I didn't try to repurpose it and say there's something else there. Right. And so much of it, I'm finding what happens with leaders happens in the organization. And if you're burnt out and you're stressed out and you're running around like a chicken with your head cut off, then guess why your employees probably feel that way, right?
So. What you do is what they do. We've got just 1 minute left, so I'll just make a comment. What I heard, and it was a little bit different than what you said, but I think it bears mentioning anyways. At Gen X, we tend to roll up our sleeves and get to work. We don't necessarily look at, well, maybe there are things that I heard maybe there are things I shouldn't be doing. Just work harder and just take it on. And I think what I heard you say is take some of those things off of your plate. Sean Dakin, one of our guests early on, talked about one of the most valuable things you can do is just take things away and move off. That said, if you enjoyed this conversation, we will be having a similar conversation, I think, in 12 days. The link is there. Sign up. Before we go, I do want to promote as I mentioned, we're here at noon Denver time, 11 Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern every Thursday. This coming Thursday, we're going to talk about the state of outbound sales. Now, if everybody's working at home, how do you cold call the office? Or can you do snail man? What do you do? And so we're going to talk about that. And we have some guests that vary in experience. And one of our guests actually is a sales and development rep. So all she does all day long is cold call. She's brilliant. So that's just one hint. We're going to bring a couple people in. We're going to have a really good conversation about that. So I hope you can make that. That'll be the same time next week. Ernie, great to see you. Love your comment on Start With Why. And I love that Reddit is still paying people the same. What an opportunity for Reddit to steal people from Google. But that said, everybody, we'll hopefully see you next week, State of Outbound Sales, and hopefully see you at our webinar. Have a great day.